PSG won, Newcastle United won. What a performance by Newcastle away at the Parc des Princes. They should be so aggrieved because they should absolutely be coming out of there with all 3 points. And honestly, I don't know how they're not. We're going to talk about that disgraceful VAR decision. I'm going to talk about it right at the end because I'm going to have a bit of a rant. But first and foremost, I want to talk about Newcastle and what a performance by the boys away on the day. Because I think when you go into any game as a fan, you don't expect your team to win. And if you go into any game expecting your team to win, then I think you might be a bit entitled. But the least you should be expecting is your boys to go out there and put in an absolute performance, to work their socks off and to give 100%. And that was absolutely what Newcastle United did today. And I think to myself that they definitely deserve to get the 3 points because PSG were poor and they couldn't break down what was an amazing Newcastle defence. And I think there's so many positives to come away with it. And the fact that it got marred right at the end by that VAR decision is such a shame for Newcastle and Newcastle United fans and the team. And I think you can see by Eddie Howe at the end of his post-match interviews just how gutted he looked. I mean, it looked like he could have been on the verge of tears. But I want to put a positive spin on things because I think Newcastle fans, there is so much to be positive about. First, we're going to talk about the group and what that result means for the group. And as we can now see from the table in Group F of the Champions League, Borussia Dortmund are now top on 10 points after convincingly beating AC Milan 3-1. PSG now second with 7, Newcastle third with 5, and Milan bottom of the group with 5 points as well. Obviously, if Newcastle were to have won that game, which they should have, they wouldn't have ended up on 7 points. PSG would have been on 6, and Milan would have been on 5. That would have firmly put the ball in their hands, and all they had to do was win the game at home against AC Milan, who are bottom of the group. And you would think to yourselves that Newcastle would have a good chance of winning that game. Now, however, they've got to beat AC Milan at home, but they've also got to hope for a favour from Borussia Dortmund against PSG, which is still possible. Obviously, Dortmund want to probably qualify top of the group to give themselves the best chance again in the last 16 against a team who've qualified second, and obviously might not be as good as the team who qualified first. So there is still a chance. However, they would have had it all in their own hands, but now they're asking for a favour as well. But this is not the time to be disappointed because I think we should really be giving Newcastle some flowers because the way they performed last year in the league to even get in the Champions League and finish in the top 4 was incredible. They definitely overperformed if you look at the sum of their players. However, as a team, they were fantastic. And then they find themselves in the Champions League. What a fantastic experience. After only 2 years ago, they got taken over and they were in the relegation zone. Just remember that and how far they've come. And the fact that they got themselves in the Champions League and they found themselves in the group of death was incredibly, incredibly unlucky. However, they ended up in that group and you got to do with it the best you can. And they have done it. And so at the beginning of the group, if you had said to Newcastle United fans, do you know what? In the last, you're going to the last game and you should have a chance of making the last 16. I think Newcastle fans would have bit their hands off and said, okay, go on. I mean, we back this team, we back Eddie Howe. And if you give us a chance, then we'll take it. And I think Newcastle have done absolutely that. So it is extremely harsh in the way it's unfolded with the VAR decision. However, we've got to give Newcastle a lot of credit. And let's not take us the wrong way. Even if they weren't to be in the Europa League, I think that is still a fantastic achievement. Finished third in what was a very tough group going into the beginning of the season. And then if you look at it being in the Europa League, they should arguably be one of the favourites to win the Europa League if they do find themselves there. I mean, there are still some tough teams in there. You've got the likes of Leverkusen, Roma, Liverpool, Atalanta, Sporting. But you know what? I think they could absolutely do a job and they could actually go ahead and win the Europa League if they were to find themselves in it. So I don't think it's something to be disheartened whatsoever. And I also want to talk about Newcastle this season as a whole because with the added Champions League fixtures, people were often saying at the beginning of the season that, Newcastle United aren't going to do as well as they have done last year because of the fact with the added fixtures, they're going to be divided and not have their focus on the league as they should do, and they're going to go for a Champions League run. But Newcastle have done incredibly well in the league as well. Newcastle have a fantastic chance of getting top 4 again this season. I mean, if you look at the fact they're in 7th at this moment in time, they're only 5 points off Aston Villa in 4th place. If you think about Aston Villa's upcoming fixtures, I think they face Bournemouth away in the next fixture. Okay, you probably expect Villa to win that one. But then they play Man City and Arsenal. So, you know what? If you're putting your money on it, you would expect them to drop a few points in this next upcoming fixtures. Think about Spurs as well. They've lost the last 3. And, before that, you were talking about them being title contenders. I certainly was. I made a video about it. And then Man United, you play them in your next home game as well. So there's definitely a chance for Newcastle to make the way up and back into the up the table, back into the Champions League next season as well. So I think, this is still very early on in the process of the takeover and Eddie Howe's reign of being Newcastle United manager. There's still a lot of hope and optimism to go into for the rest of the season, regardless of what happens in the Champions League group. It definitely isn't a failure if you don't make it into the last 16. And even if you make it in the Europa League, like I said, I think you could be one of the favourites to go ahead and win the whole thing. And let's not forget all the injuries that Newcastle have had at this moment in time. And still, despite them, they're still doing really well in the league and the Champions League. You've got the likes of Tonali suspended. You've got Byrne, Botman, Anderson, Longstaff, Murphy, Wilson, Willock, Target, Barnes. All of them out injured. Some come back sooner rather than later. But a handful of them would have been in the starting lineup or would have come off the bench and made a real impact. And you saw that. PSG made 4 changes in the game last night. But Newcastle didn't make a single one. The team that went out there had to be the team to get the job done. And they would have done if it wasn't for VAR. And I think to myself that, you know what, even look at that bench. You had 2 goalkeepers on the bench and you didn't even fill the entirety of the bench. So it goes to show what more could this Newcastle side and Eddie Howe give apart from that performance they put out on the pitch last night. I think they did a fantastic job and I think they should be so incredibly proud. And Newcastle United fans, you should be so incredibly proud of your team, you players, how you're doing in the Champions League and how you're doing in the league at this moment in time. Of course, let's talk about the game a little bit and I'm coming to that VAR decision. First and foremost, I think Nick Pope, man of the match, what a performance he had. 6 saves he made on the day. He prevented 2.56 goals on the day based on the quality of the chances that PSG had. Without him, it definitely could have been a PSG win by more comfortable than what was the end result. I think Nick Pope had a fantastic game. I think he often gets maligned for the fact that he can't pass the ball with his feet out from the back. And obviously, he has been making the latest England squads, which I think has been fair considering the fact that Sam Johnson has been having a phenomenal season so far to this point. But I think that, sometimes you can, just because a player isn't in red hot form, you can forget how good they are. And Nick Pope is definitely a world-class shot stopper, one of the best in the world at doing this. And I think that without him, Newcastle would have definitely struggled a lot more in this game. I think I want to just give a shout out to some of the younger lads as well. I think Lewis Miley in midfield, 17 years old, 17. And the fact that he is, playing in this Newcastle United side in the Champions League away to PSG. I don't know what he's going to do at this moment in time. He should be still doing his A-levels. And the fact that he is playing and doing a job in the midfield against PSG is just phenomenal. I think that Tino Livramento, playing at left back, which isn't his preferred position. He prefers to play right back, but he's filling in there because Target and Byrne are out injured. I think he's doing fantastically well. Obviously, he gives the penalty away, but I don't think it's his fault. And you know what? I just put an arm around him, Eddie Howe and the Newcastle United players, because he absolutely did not let you down in this game whatsoever. And I think, obviously, we talk about Nick Pope at the back, but who you have at both ends of the pitch. And I think Alexander Isak, just the awareness and the run to find himself, to anticipate the fact that Donnarumma might have spilled that ball when it was shot, when Almiron took that shot, and the fact that Isak found himself there ahead of all the PSG defenders. None of them anticipated Donnarumma fumbling that ball out into the 6-yard area. Isak was there and he put the ball into the back of the net, giving you the 1-0 advantage. But I do have to say, I do think Newcastle went defensive a bit too early. I definitely think there was an opportunity for them, if they were to get the ball to Isak a bit better, give him a few more chances, that they definitely could have done something in this game a little bit more. If you look at the momentum chart for the game, I think in the second half, apart from maybe the first or second minute, it was all PSG go one direction. There was absolutely no Newcastle United momentum going the opposite way, causing a bit of a threat. I mean, there were a couple of counterattacks, but really it was all PSG. And I mean, it's tough because Eddie Howe has one hand behind his back. He's got no one to bring off the bench. And really, I mean, barring an injury, no one else was going to come onto that pitch. So it had to be those 11 players. They couldn't hang on. But they should have, because that VR decision was atrocious. And let's talk about it, because apparently the best referee that we have on offer in the Champions League gave that on the field as not a penalty. He didn't see anything wrong with it whatsoever. Neither did his linesman, neither did his fourth official, neither did the other linesman. And VAR looked at it and thought to themselves, no, all of you have made a clear and obvious error. And to me, that was just absolutely the wrong decision. I mean, the fact that the ball comes off his chest, that's where it makes the first contact, and then goes onto his arm and just barely below the shirt sleeve. For me, that was absolutely not a penalty. And if that has been given as a penalty, then the game's gone. I know I'm using a bit of hyperbole there, but I do think the game's gone. I think the fact that, what is Livramento meant to do in that position? The ball comes in, it hits his chest first, And then the distance between that and where it actually hits above the elbow, like on the bicep, if it hit this, like, the fingertips of his hand, maybe. Maybe, but even then I wouldn't say it would be a penalty. But the fact that it, like, hit so close from where the ball made contact on Liverpool's chest to his arm, absolutely not the right decision. I don't know why VAR thought to themselves it was, but I think that's just, I don't know, maybe it's the rules, maybe it's the officials themselves, I'm not quite sure, but it was absolutely the wrong decision and robbed Newcastle because, like I said at the beginning, if Newcastle had won that game, which they thoroughly deserved to have done, then they would have ended up on 7 points, PSG would have been 6, and the only thing Newcastle would have to worry about is win their game at home against Milan, and they would be through. But the fact that you can make that decision at the last minute of the game, I would at least just appreciate VAR if they said, you know what, it's a big decision at the end of the game, just have a look, even if you think it's right or wrong, just have a look. But they advise the referee to overturn this decision, and I just cannot believe it. That was just absolutely the wrong decision. Newcastle were robbed. PSG very, very lucky. I mean, I know they had a lot of chances. They had an XG in the game of something like 4, but they never really looked like they were going to beat Nick Pope, and it looked like it was going to be one of those days where it just wasn't going to go their way if it wasn't for the fact that maybe referees or VAR is just incompetent at this moment in time. But Newcastle, I mean, just be so incredibly proud of your players on the pitch. I mean, they did such a good job, and they got Man United at home on the weekend, and I think the players are going to be absolutely knackered after that. However, I think they will go again. They will give their all for the club and the badge, and I think the fans, obviously, you will have seen that game in full like I have. You would have seen that they gave absolutely everything. They'll give everything again against Man United. And I think it's one where you can still be incredibly proud, even if, though, at this moment in time, it looks like you're not going to make it through in the Champions League.